Oh,
Perfect.
don't you guys love that beautiful recording sign? Hello, everyone. Arizona, welcome. Thank you for having me. Peter Pincus is my name. I am one of the represented artists in your collection, and for that I am extremely, very thankful. I'm thankful that I'm invited here today to share a little bit about myself with you, a little bit about the work. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being online, which is a tedious endeavor for us all right now, but it's a really important thing. So I'm just excited to be a part of your community. So thank you. Today, we are talking about this title, which was given to me and which I love, Vibrant Abstraction. And we are going to discuss a little bit about my background. I'll tell you a little bit about where I live, what I do, why I do what I do. And then we're going to speak specifically about one of the pieces, the piece that's in your museum. And I'm going to try to sort of build a little bit of context around that piece. And hopefully I will entertain you and give you some information about my mind. So first, one of the most important things I should say is that I am a student. I've been a student of ceramics since about 1998. I graduated from Alfred University in 2005 with my BFA, and in 2011 with my MFA. And whenever I have a chance, I show this picture of Linda Sikora, who is one of 6 faculty that had a profound influence on my life. And I keep this picture very close to remind myself of all the things I have yet to learn. If you don't know who Linda Sikora is, you need to get out there. You need to get to know her. She is just mesmerizing. So I'm a student. I am also a teacher. I currently am assistant professor of ceramics or art with a concentration in ceramics at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And this right here is my table, and this is my family, my international family, and I miss them dearly. I know that you all miss your families dearly too, if you're in education and museums. So I teach in the School for American Crafts, which is a place in RIT that prides ourselves on using our hands still. We think that there is something about technique and ability to use material, move material, and comprehension through that. And I work alongside Jane Schellenbarger, who I believe to be one of the great living potters, lovely, thoughtful individual. And she is my teammate as we move through to what is now this sort of online educational platform. If you do not know Jane, she is a stop on the tour you must take. Get to know her. And it may come as no surprise to you that I teach mold making and plaster work at RIT quite frequently. I teach it in experimental ways, and we will discuss that a little bit further. Most importantly, I am a father. I am a husband. I live in Rochester, New York. This is where I'm calling you from today with my wife, Lori, who is my studio mate, and my daughter, Evelyn, and my son, Britton, AKA T-Money, AKA Stranger Cut. These are all names he's given himself. And these are my, the things that mean the most to me. Right behind these people who mean the most to me are Japanese maples, which are the other things that mean the most to me. It's so important to remember that we're all humans, and I'm taking this time to garden. I hope that you guys are doing something similar, although Arizona is quite different than Rochester, right? Rochester, if I may be so pompous as to say, it might just be the greatest place to garden in the country with the exception of Seattle and Portland, Oregon. We have this really beautiful landscape. It's quite cold in the winter. It's where we call home, my wife and I both. We've grown up here, and so we've established a studio. And that studio is where I call you from today. It's in what used to be this little box of a house, 44 Devonshire Drive. And in this basement of this house, which is the reason that we purchased this house, we had this opportunity to sort of dream in 2011 when I graduated from Alfred to see this basement studio as our future, right? And so we bought the house, we established, this is a picture from one of the first weeks that I started working there. And then the things that happen, right? We had a daughter in 2012 and a son in 2014. And if you buy a small house, having children, you might as well just buy an architect, because every time you have a child, you need to put an addition on your house. So that's what we did. And we sort of started to construct the house around our growing family. And the thing that's sort of problematic about doing that is that your family, as they grow and they continue to grow, they continue to require additional space. This is a picture taken from right around 2015 when our life started to swell in our small ranch house in Rochester and Penfield. And something else that was quite interesting was our little dream at that time in the basement studio was starting to grow and evolve on its own. Are you guys still there? Okay, you guys, you looked a little frozen for a minute. Anyway, so, you know, we needed to start to think about leaving our house or maybe moving on to a different house. But I had this goal, this vision that I could maybe build a house around a studio here. And so really what I desperately wanted and needed was this window. And I thought, man, if I could just have a window, like my life would be set. And so we did it. We kind of moved into, hold on a minute. There we go. Sorry, we're having just a little bit of technical issues here. So we moved into construction phase so that I could have this here window and an upstairs studio. And that is what made me start to think that, wow, if I have a window, I can see outdoors and I can start to become very interested in, say, gardening. And that is when I became interested in Japanese maples. And so I found this tree store that is right up the road from us, and it hosts 450 different varieties of Japanese maples. And so I'd take my son there every day, T-Money, when he was much smaller, and we would look at all of the different trees that we could purchase until we found the one that was destined for the spot. And we would start to construct our dream studio, and I would envision T-Money sitting down there, and I would see the tree, and my life was happening, and it happened. And so this is a picture taken from 2017 when we established this sort of crazy house, which sort of was our house, and it sort of grew to become the family in the studio and the life, and all kind of in one. And so that's where I call you, or yeah, call you from today, I guess not join you from today, is right here in this here garage. And so virtually, I'm gonna want you guys to go in through the garage, and you're gonna enter the studio, and you can say hi to Lori. She'll be up there working on some color work, but you're gonna pass by her, you're gonna go down the stairs, you're gonna climb to the basement, and you're gonna go right here, and we're right there, right back where we started, although now it looks incredibly different. Now it's 2020, and this is where I teach, and this is where I make. And who would have imagined that we're here now in the COVID pandemic, but it is so interesting that we can have these sorts of dialogues and conversations together. So I wanted to welcome you into my house, considering the time. So you know it, you see it, we are here. I also like to tell people about my house because it sort of tells you a lot about me. I like to take something that is pretty simple and make it very complicated in a way that makes sense to only me. And that applies very directly to what I do in the studio. I like to take something that is relatively simple and make it relatively complex in a way that makes sense to me. And in school, it's only slightly different. I like to take something that's seemingly simple and make it incredibly complex in a way that doesn't make sense to my students. And maybe that might get me fired, but it also might sort of open some doorways and open people into new ways of experimenting and thinking. All of this, of course, revolves around a deep passion, a deep belief in the pot, the utilitarian object, as an idea, as a thing, as an image, as a complex series of solutions to a very simple problem. I'm talking to you today specifically about these pieces, which were made in about 2014 and which currently reside in the museum. And these are two pieces that mean quite a lot to me, and they're a part of that big story. And so I think about them frequently. I learned a lot from them, and I will share what I've learned with you now. So let's break this apart into two sort of dimensions, right? The first would be obviously shape. It is quite clear, if you know my work at all, that you know that I have some sort of relationship to history or historical form. And now the work is becoming a little more rigid, whereas it was a little more at 15 a little more provocative and a little bit more open. Now it is quite rigid and tightly confined, or not confined, but interested in the history of specifically Greek pottery. And I owe that to these two very, very important minds, Leslie Farron on the left, who is a gallerist who represents me and stimulates my mind and is constantly challenging me to think about things differently. And Anne Forschler-Teresh, who Leslie introduced me to, who is the chief curator of decorative arts at the Birmingham Museum of Art, which is host to the largest collection of Josiah Wedgwood pottery in the country, second largest in the world. I wish Anne was here and she might say, sort of, or maybe, or yes, I don't know. But it is this really pretty magnificent place. And for the last few years, occasionally I've had the chance to go there and to play with these pots and to study these pots. And really what I'm after currently is a better understanding of the story of Etruria, which is a manufacturing plant from about the 18th century. And it's this really pretty cool story of Josiah Wedgwood, who's pictured here in a medallion on the right, vase maker general to the universe. Who, that's a pretty intense name someone would give himself, but you know, I kind of think the man earned it. And Thomas Bentley, his partner, and it's sort of the story of these two guys kind of gaining all this knowledge and making these connections, one of which was with this guy, Sir William Hamilton, who, if any of you have a picture of like this drawn of you or painted of you, I need to know it because you two will be the boss, right? This guy who has this pretty amazing collection of Greek and Etruscan pots, and he sort of says, you know what, I need to collect all of the information on my collection and I need to put it into the collection of Etruscan, Greek, and Roman antiquities from the cabinet of the humble Sir William Hamilton. Anyway, so he sort of puts together this collection of the images, the surfaces, and then also the forms themselves. And they're depictions, right? They're drawings of the forms, and then there are also architectural blueprints. And what's so cool about this period of time for me is that it shows you what happens when one person has access to someone else's architectural drawings. And so we see Josiah Wedgwood as one of the first people to, in my mind, become something like a 3D printer. And so he and Bentley have this idea, and this idea is like to make Disneyland, right? But we have to think about it not as like the Disneyland we know and love and wish we could go back to post-COVID. No, this is like the 18th century rendition of this thing, right? So we have to sort of mitigate our senses a little bit, right? So they wanted to create this place where they could most closely replicate the conditions, the working styles, and the lifestyles of the potters that they wanted to represent through these Etruscan pots, right? And it was kind of a big secret as they're putting it together. And on the first day, they slam, they go out in front and they make these first day vases, and the world's like, whoa, slow the boat. This is amazing. This is incredible because, as we all know, it was pretty hard to get your hands on these Greek pots, and now you have someone who's able to replicate them very closely. Now, of course, Josiah Wedgwood would go on to create jasperware, which is what he would ultimately be known for, which really isn't that Etruscan work whatsoever. But my interest is in the subtlety of form that was developed from a better understanding of history through those drawings that he had access to. So we see Wedgwood on the left, and we see this Meissen sort of celebration pot of 1818 that said, it was like, yo, Wedgwood, we're on to you. We know your stuff. Like, we know how to replicate the stuff that you do. And also we're celebrating that, and we're letting you know that we're in a sort of a competitive space. But there's such a big difference between these two forms. And it's careful observation about the foot, the belly, the lip, the neck, all of these things that sort of lead me to a better understanding of what one can learn and know when they study history, and how we can sort of subtly play and alter those things. And so I'm kind of right now, I'm playing with those pictures myself in the studio. I'm using them as fodder for myriad things. Number one, a series of lectures which started about 2017 on the topic of channeling Josiah Wedgwood, or considering Josiah Wedgwood and innovation in the 18th century as it reflects on 21st century studio practice. And that thing is sort of, You know, they started as projects for school, and they're evolving into sort of lectures out into the world. And they're growing and changing. They're coming back to school. I'm making classes about it. And then very naturally, I'm an artist, I'm a potter. And so it's very important for me to sort of take this stuff that I'm learning and apply it to the work in the studio. So this right here is, this is Leslie Farron's gallery where we set up channeling Josiah Wedgwood, the exhibition, right? And then I just kind of keep it going in the studio. I keep the pieces evolving as best I can, as a way to better understand what I'm reading, what I'm looking at, and what I'm trying to make sense of. Now, clearly, those are slightly different than the work that we're talking about today, but you can see a lineage, right? I get to know Leslie in about 2015, and all of the work that we're talking about there was about the last 2 years. These are from 2014, and the roots of all of that are really in graduate school when I started looking at Sev pottery, Sev manufactured ceramics, if you will, and I started sort of playing and teasing out some of those ideas in the work, not very academically, and still to this day, I don't consider myself an academic, rather someone who takes something that is researchable and making it complicated in a way that makes sense to me. Surface. So, vibrant abstraction, surface. Most of the sort of questions that I have about the work relate to my understanding of color and my knowing of color and whatever that means. And all of that has its foundation back in the same place as those vessels. In 2011, this is my MFA thesis exhibition. And it is a bunch of colorful vessels, urns, bottles, jars, vases, and the like. And it is very much focused on color and culture and where I grew up and where other people grew up, and sort of, you know, all the stuff that seems so muddy now, now that it's 10 years out of graduate school for me. Anyway, I have this show, and that show buys me an opportunity to become an adjunct teacher at Roberts Wesleyan College, which is just up the road from where I am now, about 25 minutes. And this place is, it could not be more different. I was leaving Alfred University, which, if any of you know, it's a relatively competitive school with a very big art program and a very robust ceramics program. And I enter this very small Christian liberal arts school with a very small, intimate art program. And it was a culture shock that at the time I thought was really great. It was a shock that now in 2020, it seemed like a very small, minor thing. But at the time there, I really had to learn how to start to communicate with people differently from the way that I had learned in college and in my earlier years. And obviously, they looked at my work, my portfolio, and they said, hey, this guy must know a whole lot about design and about color and stuff. So maybe it would be a really good idea if we have him teach 2D design. So they offered me a design course. And I would say that at that time, I had no sense of 2D design. I had no sense of color whatsoever. All of this was happening intuitively. And so I can vividly remember trying to explain this to students, and I had no idea what I was looking at, right? This was a simple color theory exercise that was just so far beyond me because I hadn't put in the work and I hadn't really looked at color theory and understood color theory since like I was a freshman in college. So I teach this 2D design class. It's a miserable failure and I'm an embarrassment, and that's okay, because then I hit the books and I go back to interaction of color, and I open the book and I read this sentence and I say to myself, well, okay, you had me at the book, right? It's time for me to learn. And so I invested from 2011 to 2014, I invested all of myself into this book as a way to teach my students. And what I saw as being sort of essential to that was sort of living out a lot of the things that were in the book in my own studio practice. So these simple value exercises were then placed into my own work. And I limited the scope of my work at that point to just cups and bottles. And that was kind of a healthy experience for me to sort of pull back and just sort of think about my work and its relationship to this book and its relationship to this teaching. And there's a whole portfolio of some pretty ugly things that arrived, out of that period of time. But come 2014, I had developed a slightly better understanding of color theory and its implication in three-dimensional work. I have this buddy, Bradley Butler, this sort of amazing friend of mine, my same age, who became the gallery director of this beautiful gallery in Clifton Springs, which is a small town south of Rochester. And he said, "Hey, I'm the gallery director of this brand new gallery. I would love you to make my first solo show." And so this was kind of really cool opportunity for me to go back and almost do my graduate thesis show again. So focus on the same types of objects that I made, but try to look at them in a very different way with different eyes. And I had a very different perspective in 2014 because, I had children. This was a picture that was taken opening day of Evelyn, who at that time was 2.5, and Britton, who was almost born, maybe a month or two away from being born. And so, all of that was like kind of happening. The life was happening along with the work. And so centered in this exhibition were these two urns that were made, in my own mind. They were sort of Lori and I sort of tried to work with Albert's One Color Showing Two Faces, and just started to think a little bit about how color can sort of bring things together, and that sort of bringing together can allow these two things to have their own identity. And so I thought about that, and I thought about marriage, and I thought about how fortunate I was, and I thought about how complicated things were. And all of that is in those vessels that are sitting there in your museum. It's very personal work. Not that I like to be outwardly personal with what I make, but it's kind of fun to tell you that was a motivating factor in my decision making at that time. Of course, I didn't just stop in 2014. I became quite interested in the idea of transparency, which I would say is like for me, it was the end of the road for that book. It was the greatest. How can you get better than that concept, right? And I tried to think about the different ways that transparency could be a part of the surface composition or expression of the work. And so over the years, I've been starting to try to develop a palette, which had grown quite developed, I would say, significantly when my wife Lori joined in 2015. And so this is an image of us with a little bit of a foundation under us, where we're developing a palette that we can pass back and forth between value and color. And this would be right around 2017, a series that is starting to really play with transparency, but it's also complicating the surface by contrasting values and inversing and things like that. Playing with circles, team. And so today things are taking a little bit of a turn. I'm focused a little bit differently on the concept of color, or one's relationship to color. I'm focusing on the Sol-LeWitt installation at Mass MoCA, which is Mass MoCA is where Leslie Farron has the Independent Art Projects Gallery. And this is a gallery that I have the privilege of making exhibitions in periodically. And so we're right now focusing on the concept of art in the age of influence. And so there's no denying the fact that going to this museum in 2015 has had an impact on me, such as opening my phone every year since the digital age has had quite an impact on me, on my thinking, and my motivations. And so I'm trying to sort of dig into that and consider what influence is in the 21st century, when we have so many things that are influencing us. And as I said before, Leslie is quite the motivator, and she's nudging me. And we've been talking about the difference between collaboration and inspiration, and appropriation and plagiarism. And she challenged me at this one point. She said, why don't you just see if you can't sort of plagiarize just take a piece, take a wall drawing and try to make it exactly as it is. And we all know that that's a very difficult thing to do. Under normal circumstances, you get some sort of agency when someone tells you to try to do it. And so I said, well, this might be my absolute favorite drawing in that entire museum. It sort of speaks to me. The wall is divided vertically into 15 parts, all 1, 2, 3, and 4-part combinations of colors using color ink washes. And so I've been trying to play with this painting in my own studio. You can see the painting is hidden in this series of columns because that's as close as I can get to downright plagiarism at this point. But that's, yeah, I wish I had an actual image to show you, but I don't have a space large enough to show this entire thing and photograph it. So if you want to see it, you will have to catch up with me at the show when it installs, hopefully one of these days. And in addition, right, I'm playing with a lot of those formal ideas, but somewhat abstracting them. So thinking about the amphora, thinking about the, something about something spinning in color and the relationship between the color and the form and the handle and this sort of floating object. And then last but not least, I'm thinking about different ways to sort of branch out from making vessels themselves. So this was a tile piece that I made from about 2016 to 2018, which has spurred its own recent body of work. And I'm going to show that alongside this other work. And that is, in a nutshell, vibrant abstraction. So I hope this in some way answers some questions or builds us into some ability to communicate and talk. Thank you for having me.
That was awesome. Great. Thank you. Now we're in any questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can type into the chat and then I or Peter can read it out loud or just answer it from there. It's whatever you feel comfortable with.
Peter, your process is insane and just amazing with your mold making and everything. Can you share your website? Do you have videos on your website that shows your process? Because I think that in itself is another amazing part of how you work.
Yeah, I admit my website is not in the best shape right now. We have a new website that we're waiting to put up and I need to do some finishing touches. What I could do is I could send you an invitation, or not an invitation, a video at some point when I have something that's a little bit clean.
Okay.
Would that work? And then maybe we could post it somewhere.
Sure, yeah.
It is important to note that we're in the middle of this pandemic thing. Woo! And so I'm trying to learn how to teach online. And so that means that a lot of video content is starting to be produced in this studio. And so, yeah, I would love to share something with you that's a little bit better.
Okay, thanks.
We could, if you want, I could, while we're talking, I could jump onto Instagram and show you maybe, pulling apart a mold or something.
What do you think, Kevin?
Oh, I forgot I was muted. That sounds, yeah. I mean, it's only 12:37, so as far as like time goes, I'm not concerned. I think that's great. I think that would be really interesting. I mean, I'm a little biased because I'm personally interested, but we should do it, yeah.
All right, well, let me see if I can't dig something up as we're speaking.
Okay, I'll read this question while you're looking and see if you can multitask that. Bobby asks, oh, never mind, sorry. Bobby didn't ask anything. There was another question that I no longer have any longer.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask a question. So I glossed over it, but what got you interested in ceramics? So like, do you know, was there a time point when you're like a kid playing with Play-Doh, or was it high school, you took a ceramics class?
Absolutely. Hold on, I'm signing in so that I can start digging. And so I need to stop digging so that I can answer this question. So I was not the best ever in the world. I was a pretty awful student in middle school and in high school. And I had no plans of going to college whatsoever. I had plans of becoming a professional snowboarder, which were pipe dreams because that was just a really bad idea also. So I wasn't incredibly motivated by academics or studio or any of it, but I took art classes, as we all sort of do. And I was not interested in painting, and I thought the teacher was too hard on me, and like, woe is me, you know, the whole thing, right? Making excuses. And so one day, just randomly, I had to complete my ceramics or my art concentration, right, to graduate. And so I just pointed and it said ceramics. And I said, is that like jewelry? You know, I thought I was so cool. At that time, I was with Katie Cadera, my girlfriend, and Brittany Young, her best friend, and we were in the art class, and they said, okay, just take it, right? And so I was a junior at that point in high school, and so I take the class, I signed up, I walk into the room, and there's this kid, Seth Werlin, who is like throwing this pot on this wheel. And I could show you, I still have a picture of this pot. It was instant. I was like, this is what I need to do right here. This is it. I went from 0 to whatever I have to do this. I forced poor Seth Werlin to teach me how to throw. I then set up a basement studio. I started working 7 days a week. Someone told me you could go to college for this. So I went from D student to A student. I said, okay, Alfred's an hour and a half down the road, and it seems like that's pretty cool. So I go there, and they said, there's no way you'll get in. You need a portfolio. So I did everything in my power to kind of get in there. And I just, you know, I've never been the great example. I've just always really wanted this so desperately, 7 days a week, pushing through. And it all started there.
That's really fascinating. Like grad school.
Let's see. This right here is we'll screen share. Can everyone see this? This is me taking apart a mold that I made for a workshop and for a class. I was starting, you know, these online courses in March. And so I taught an online live action lecture series at this place, the art school at Old Church in New Jersey. And so this was a demonstration that sort of bridged that and bridged an elective mold making course that I taught. And let me see if I can't grab the actual.
Wow.
And so what that is, this was a sort of a hypothetical conversation. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to spotlight my video for a moment. I'm not self-obsessed. I just want to show you that what we were talking about in the class was taking a simple shape, right? So this is a square, this is sort of a cylinder of plaster, and it has a void on the interior, and being able to sort of change its dimension both from a side view and from a front view. And so we were thinking, or top view. So we were thinking of different ways of manipulation of simple geometric shapes. And so a mold was built around this at the same time as the object itself was made, the model was made, and there were lots of different things that we could do with these together. And that mold was one resulting composition from that, or arrangement, if you will, from that, that exercise. And I'll keep digging.
All right, so I'll ask you another question then. Stephanie asks, well, she says, the rhythm in your tile piece is so good. Are there plans of moving towards similar projects in the future?
Yeah, so the tile piece, I finished that in about 2018, and I had a great chance to show it at Louis Wexler Gallery. So it's been there, and now it's going to kind of jump into this show with Leslie Farron. It was made in a completely different way, obviously. Maybe I could jump up into a different lecture and show you the piece that motivated it. Hold on. The problem with this sort of online thing is that you can multitask. So you can jump in and out of one thing. Kansas State. Give me just one moment. And then I will answer that question, I promise. Is it here?
Okay, while you're looking, I just want to quick say that the Ceramics Research Center, we have a unique and amazing ability to have open storage, which we have about 800 objects out on view at all times, and Peter's work is on view. So once we reopen, I invite all of you to come see his work in person and just have an adventure in the open storage and see all the work that's out there. So,
thank you, Mary Beth.
Sure.
So, thank you also for that. You helped me fill a little bit of space here as I went quiet. The tile piece itself, the goal of the tile piece was actually Solowit inspired, where I would just take something in this case that I had set as a standard and then apply that to a different format. So this is a series of columns. There are 1,200 colors here that fit in this sort of composition of 8, about 24-inch three-dimensional structures. And so each one of these is its own modular piece, and I'll show you the mold system for that in just a moment. Anyway, I came up with this idea that it would be really cool to use this formula that was created, which was panels, which we'll call these things panels. Seams, we'll call these things seams. I wanted to do panels of one value gradient with seams of the opposing values so that they were contrasting and running across each other. And then I wanted to do a gradient of color that would in some way sort of merge the two together. And so Lori and I sat down with some wine for about a month to come up with this possible composition, and then built it into these vessels. Now, you guys probably remember this picture of Evelyn standing next to a very large series of cylinders in our basement. They were 4 feet tall. The installation was about 10 feet wide. They no longer were talking about the sort of the scale of pottery or the utility or the community of pottery, and they really weren't working as painting or sculpture. They were at this very strange in-between space. And so I thought that that might motivate some new thinking, and that thinking extended to like, who has to make the work? And so we had this really cool dude, Colby, that came in as an intern who asked us, hey, do you want to be an intern? And so Lori, Colby, and I together reproduced those 1,200 colors in the form of these quatrefoil tiles. Now, if you see down here, they've been sort of bent and distorted, and they're like kind of seam lines kick in somewhat. Now, obviously, I teach at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and technology is a part of that name. And I'm not personally so motivated by technological advancements. I totally enjoy a bag of plaster in my hands. And so I've been challenged by thinking about 3D printing, what it can produce, and the implications of its production. So this seemed like a pretty cool thing. I took a tile from, from our shower. Lori loves quatrefoil tile, and I said, well, let's just put this into the computer and see if we can't move it and motivate it and alter it in some kind of crazy ways. And then we cast one tile for each of the 1,200 colors that were represented. And Colby and I spent about a week on the ground making this composition together. And first, we just line by line put the tile where the color was supposed to be. In this matrix. But then once we did that, we sort of really realized that this thing didn't make sense. And so it took about a week to move all of the tile around and to create a separate composition, which is what you see here now. And the best part was Lori came downstairs when this was finished and we were done, we were finished, and I felt really proud, and I was like, wow, this is collaboration, this is team, this is like, we're thinking about community, we're thinking about color and theory and all that stuff. And she goes, hey, wasn't this all about silhouette and like, you know, sticking to plan? And I said, well, yeah. And she goes, well, doesn't it feel kind of weird that you couldn't? I was like, Lori, get out of here. She got me good. She always gets me good. So yeah, anyway, the idea or the potential of what is there, if we jump back in for a moment, right, this is pretty straightforward. This is a field of quatrefoil tile that are all consistently scaled and consistently sized. And hypothetically, you could make this tile by hand. It made it a little easier to 3D print it, but you could make it by hand. Now, what's really cool is if I take this this system of tiles that's and I make an image of those, right, in CAD, which this is outside of my wheelhouse, so I'm going to need to have some help from RIT. But if I put, like, say, a point right there, and then I stretch this whole thing, it will blur that quatrefoil over time or over space, right? And each one of those tile, well, they would be almost impossible to produce by hand. Andy Brayman has a kind of a cool example of not the same thing, but a similar idea. But by hand, it's very complicated. But I could just, let's say there's 50 tile that each are slightly different. I could print and number each one of them. And so I could start to do things that really explore the idea of tessellation, how a tessellation may alter or change or augment, and what that could do compositionally and physically. I want to pull this up while we're at it. This is me unbricking that mold. Or actually, I'm putting it together there. So each one of those little plaster components is colored, and each one of those are labeled and carefully organized into a stack that makes a column when you pour clay into it. Anyway, that was quite a long, this was a big circular conversation around answering the question. Yes, I would love to make more tile. I have a small rendition of that tile that's upstairs that's gonna, or of that composition that's going to the show as well. And then I'm gonna start moving forward. I have been working with, well, I had like the coolest semester ever in the classroom. That, of course, like all of yours, ended a little prematurely. But what we were working on was these kind of interesting modular tile systems where one mold could, say, produce 15 to 20 different tile. And that's kind of an interesting premise for thinking about puzzle, like how puzzles work and how we might consider, again, tessellations. I'm sure there are more questions.
Yeah, Sam follows up with the tiles. Are you envisioning these to move into more architectural application? It'd be amazing as a veneer on a building or a wall. Yeah,
that's the hope, is that, you know, there's a limit to what we're able to do with a vessel, right? With a pot. If you start to make it above a certain size, it starts to mean something very different, and it starts to lose a certain quality. And this is scalable in a way that we could start to really, like, right? We could sort of experience, like you said, an entire building, or all four walls of a building, or like a, you know, 100-foot tall thing. Or, I don't know. It's also new to us.
Yeah. Stephanie says, you're well known for your precision, so I'm surprised you decided to keep the machine's hand in this work rather than buffing those seams out. I'm pretty sure it was a decision, right?
The actual seams themselves?
This is prior to the tile, so I think that's what that was.
Yeah, so the seams, so most of the work has, well, let me show you this. the beauty of virtual visits. So this is a cup, drink, right? And so this cup is both round and square. So that seam is exaggerated. I started as a circle and then I cut and I created an edge, an outward edge. And so I like to, if at all possible, I like to play up those seams in the work. If it's just a round form, simple, no color or one color, I want to kind of remove those seams. And like this, yeah, we're extending this, but I just noticed as I said this, you said you're talking about the tile. Yeah, I wanted that tile to just be like, it just was what it was coming out of the, you know, we cleaned it up ever so slightly, but we had some sharp edges in there, and I left the 3D printed surface on there because it seemed like such a departure that it felt cool to sort of incorporate that subtle texture on top of the larger texture of that tessellation.
What is traveling with that? Like if those tiles that, because it's all individual, correct?
The tile?
Like that tile.
So that particular piece is a nightmare. It's about 9 feet wide and 5 feet tall, and it's mounted to this really gorgeous frame that my buddy Malin Houston made, and you guys should check him out if you're interested in furniture design. He's pretty cool. Anyhow, so he made this thing for me and it crated with the crate. It's like 600 pounds and 10 feet long. And so that's a problem. But they are all affixed to it. And so that's kind of a good thing. I think building modular framing systems would be a little bit better in the future. Right now, we're trying to get it from one space to the next space. And that is during COVID proving to be an extremely difficult feat.
Yeah. Lastly, since we're running out of time, Kim wants to know if you're related to Barry Manilow.
No one has ever asked me that. Why? Is it because of my low voice, which isn't actually low?
Just for fun, probably.
I've never thought of that.
Looks. So, if there's any other questions.
Really? Kim, get me to the future. We've got to do, what is that thing where you, Ancestry.com? What if Barry Manilow and I are, that'd be cool.
That would be fun. You should check it out. That would be really cool, actually. All right, well, I know. Any other questions? Thank you for joining us, Peter, and everyone else that joined us, and then hopefully someone ate lunch too. Where can people check out? You showcased your Instagram, but is there, do you want to plug your Instagram, or you said your website? We can put that elsewhere.
Yeah, well, the website is whatever, peterpincus.com. I think it's a little outdated. It will become a little more in date soon. Instagram is a good way. You can always reach out. I love nothing more than talking to people, and I know this is a really crazy time. So if anyone has questions or wants to connect educationally, I'm all about it.
Cool. Well, thank you. And then next Masterpiece at Midday is going to be Tuesday, July 21st with the ASU Art Museum's assistant curator, Brittany Corrales. So if join us for that, that's going to be at noon Arizona time, which is Pacific time. And that's going to be on abstract art and philosophy, which is going to be a wild adventure. But other than that, thanks you guys for joining us, and then have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you all, and be safe, be healthy, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.